Play some Grateful Dead music and tell everybody Bill is here. Bill Walton. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. And today we're going to have a special episode on the life, at least the basketball life, of legendary player and one of the great centers in college basketball history, if not the greatest center, although that argument will put on hold right now, of Bill Walton, the great UCLA Bruin who went on to play for the Portland Trailblazers, the San Diego Clippers, and of course won his second basketball championship with the Boston Celtics, being named nominated for Sixth Man of the Year with the Celtics. And I think why Bill Walton just resonates with so many great NBA historians and great NBA fans of probably the 60s, 70s, and 80s is the fact he was just such an offbeat kind of a character at a time when, I don't know, most players were kind of all in a line. There weren't too many players or being out there. And here's Bill Walton, a kid who suffered from a stutter and managed to overcome that, become a really good broadcaster. I always liked his color commentary on Pac-12 games. I always thought he added quite a bit of opinion, no question about it. But he also did what I always like of color analyzers, and that is he anticipated potentially a play that was coming to be, instead of coming on the play that just was. And I always appreciated that, because I always thought that it's kind of like when you're watching a basketball game or a football game or even a baseball. I find it almost like a chess match, and you're trying to be 3-4 moves ahead of your opponent. And I always felt that Bill Walton was very much like that as a college basketball broadcaster. And of course, I have to take this back. I never liked the UCLA Bruins. In fact, I couldn't stand them when they were winning all those times. But it's like the great Duke Blue Devil teams. I always respected them because they were so good. I just couldn't beat them. And I guess that's why I was so mad at them. But Walton really came into his own. You know, people don't realize this. Kareem is, and I have to really take back what I just said about Bill Walton being the greatest college basketball player of all time. It's got to be, without a doubt, Lou Alcindor, a.k.a. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who led the UCLA Bruins to 3 consecutive titles and had a number of unbeaten seasons with the Bruins under John Wooden, and of course got his revenge, so to speak, when they came back and in the semifinals of 1967 defeated the University of Houston Cougars, or Houston University. I think it's University of Houston. The Cougars and Elvin Hayes just throttled them after losing to them earlier in the year. So they got their revenge against the Cougars and, of course, won another title. When I was growing up, and I guess, you either loved or hated the UCLA Bruins. In fact, I was talking to a guy today who simply loves everything LA. So he was on board of the blue and gold. One thing I do love, and this is just, I do like their uniforms. I like their traditional uniforms. I like how the UCLA stands up there. I know USC fans like to say UCLA stands for "You Clods Lost Again." But of course, they retaliate, Bruins fans, with USC stands for University of Spoiled Children. I love all that kind of stuff. But UCLA has 2 really iconic uniforms. One is their football uniforms, that powder blue with the old, like 1950s look with the gold stripe on their shoulders. And of course, you can't take anything away from what I think embodied basketball uniforms of the 60s and 70s with the UCLA uniforms when they are at their height winning. And I have to tell you, they win in 64 or 65 with Walt Hazzard. They're not in the tournament the following year in 1966. That happens to be UTEP, or what was then known as Texas Western. Then they win. And this is what I mean. 67, 68, 69, 1970, 1971, 1972, 1973. They're beaten in 1974 by NC State. And then in Wooden's last go round in the Final Four of 1975. He beats the University of Kentucky and Joe B. Hall with really probably, I don't know, I guess UCLA fans, it might be argued probably one of the worst UCLA teams of the Wooden years. That team, of course, was led by David Myers, I believe, and they might have had Schwinn Nader on it. But Bill Walton, let me just tell you this. Bill Walton, what I really loved about Walton was this. They destroyed Memphis State, who I was rooting for. They destroyed, well, Walton wasn't the basketball center for the Bruins in 1971. Actually, people don't realize this. It's a great trivia question. Between Walton and Jabbar, I know the real UCLA fans will know this, but it was a guy by the name of Steve Patterson who led them to the 70 and 71 championships. And then Bill Walton came in 72 and 73. Then they make the semis of 1974 and lose to NC State, who would go on undefeated that year and defeat Marquette in the championship game. And then they would rebound UCLA and recapture in Wooden's final year. But in all those years, and this is the thing about them, they were just, they were just unbeatable. The 1974, I'm just going to put it this way. I was just looking at their school history, okay? Starting with Wooden. And I will tell you this, and I'm using Basketball Reference as this. Wooden would never have survived today. And by that, I mean this. Wooden comes onto the scene, and I think I've mentioned this before. He replaces a fellow by the name of Wilbur Johns, who finishes 22 and 13 in 1947 and 1948 in the Pacific Coast Conference. Wooden comes in, goes 22 and 7, 24 and 7, 19 and 10, 19 and 12, 16 and 8, 18 and 7, 21 and 5, 22 and 6. In those years, he lost in the semifinals 3 times, but that was when they had about 25 teams or even 16 teams, okay? Probably, and then after winning 20 games in a row, 3 straight years from 1954 to 57, he goes 16 and 10, he goes 16 and 10, 16 and 9, 14 and 12. I have a feeling that had this been happening today, Wooden would have been gone. Fans would have been up to here with them getting close, winning 20 games, and not even getting, let's say, to the Final Four, and then having, for UCLA, mediocre seasons, winning 16 games, even though they finished over 500. Now, he comes in, still hasn't won, loses in the NCAA semifinals. He finally, in 1964, breaks it. He goes 30-0 after the previous year going 20-9. This is John Wooden. And that team wins in 1964. I think they beat, if I'm not mistaken. No, they beat Duke actually in the finals. They beat Kansas State, and then they beat Duke, who was number 3 in the country. So they finished 30-0. They don't get there the next year. In 66, Wooden beat Southern Cal, but they don't qualify for the tournament in 65, 66. In 67, this is where he goes crazy. 30-0. They beat Houston in the semifinals. Houston had been ranked number 7 in the country. He beat them by 15. They beat Houston 73-68. The following year, they go 29. All right, this is the Houston year. They face Houston and lose 71-69 in January. They were ranked number 2 at the time, Houston, and then faced them in the semis when Houston was ranked number 1 and blew them out. So I didn't realize this. This is why I love doing this show. I learned so much. Even in my in my mistakes, I learned more. I didn't realize they faced Houston 3 times over the space of basically about 14, 16 months of college basketball. But they throttled Houston in the semis. And the first game, of course, was held in the Astrodome. And then this was played in the LA Sports Arena. And then in 68, they not only defeat Houston, they beat them by 32, but then they go out and they beat North Carolina, and Dean Smith, which was ranked number 4, the Tar Heels, by 23 to capture a 29-1 season in an NCAA tournament. The next year, they're 29-1 again. The only loss they sustain was the Southern California 46-44. They were some good Southern California teams back then. And of course, you got to remember this, the leagues would only send the conference winners. And of course, the ACC, I believe, was the only one really hosting a post-tournament ACC tournament. So you had to finish number one during the regular season. All right. Then they beat 28-2, 69-70. Their only losses that year were the Southern Cal again, 87-86, and Oregon, 78-65. I remember that year as being really the first year of following college basketball because probably in 69, in October of 69, I went to my first college football game. My dad took my brothers and me to Yankee Stadium to see Notre Dame play Army, and the Army got throttled. And then that February, I remember this because I forgot to do a book report that night for school. It was a Thursday night. And of course, MSG, Madison Square Garden, was staging double headers. And my brothers and I, along with my dad, we went because my cousin played for Georgetown. He got his tickets. So we went to the first game. We didn't stay for the second because it was school night, even then. And actually, the funny thing is, Georgetown lost to Manhattan. It was, I think, the only time in his career that my cousin led Georgetown in scoring in a game. But that year, Georgetown had played Jacksonville in December, and the game ended or was forfeited to Jacksonville because there was a huge fight on the court. The Georgetown coach paraded or took his team off the court and refused to come back and play. They gave Georgetown a forfeit. Georgetown, the Hoyas appealed. They won the appeal. So that loss was eliminated from their record, and it allowed them to qualify for the NIT, which I watched on TV. And of course, they lost to LSU by 1 point in that game. Maravich, I always like to say, went for 44, but he had an okay game for a Maravich. I think he still had like 23 points. My cousin did score a couple of points in that game, so it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. But that was the year I most remember about the NCAA tournament and the NIT and all the rest of it. And not to make a big deal, but the NIT was still a pretty big deal in the early 70s. You know, Marquette would win that year, the 70, and then 7 years later win the NCAA title. And that would be Al McGuire's last season at the helm of the Warriors. But anyway, I remember this, and I was just telling a buddy of mine at work, Jacksonville had Artis Gilmore and Penrose Lane, 2 7-footers. They just came out of nowhere. They were scary. And they probably presented the biggest obstacle to UCLA of any of the teams that kind of played in the finals. Okay. Now I know I'm talking about North Carolina. I'm talking about Dayton. I'm talking about other good, solid teams, but they had 2 7-footers. And I seem to recall, and of course, memory and of course, mythology and all things about, legends and stuff. There was a rule against dunking at the time in NCAA, which actually Lou Alcindor, they actually stripped or they took that rule or imposed that rule because it was like Lou Alcindor was the only guy who could do it at the time. Now you get guys 6 foot, 5'11" who can all dunk. It's amazing, the athleticism of some of these kids. Anyway, Sidney Wicks, who was an All-American forward, good player, solid player, went in for a dunk. As I recall, for some reason, I think he dunks over Artis Gilmore. He got a technical foul for it, and they lost, obviously, the points on the tee. But it sent a message. Now, I could be wrong, and like I said, my imagination may be running, but it's what I recall the most. And at that point in the game, Jacksonville was in it. After that alleged dunk by Wilkes or the technical foul and all the rest of it, UCLA just dominated them. Psychologically took everything out of Jacksonville, and they win the game by 11. Now, I don't even think it was that close. I think they made it close at the end. But that Jacksonville team would wind up number 4. Actually, ready for this, UCLA would face Long Beach State. Jerry Tarkanian's team beat them by 23. Then they placed, which was ranked number 19 in the country. Utah State ranked 16th, 101-79. They would win that game by. New Mexico State, which was ranked number 5, had two guys. I remember Sam Lacey was their center. They lost by 16, and Lou Henson was their coach, who would later on and coach Illinois to the NCAA Final Four and lose to Michigan in the semis. That was the 1989 year with Seton Hall. And then they would throttle Jacksonville. It was like they were never tested. Now, to all the UCLA haters like me, it wasn't like today where they put you in these pods or they would put you in different regions. UCLA always seemed to have, quote unquote, home games. They never seemed to move from out west. They always got a first round bye because 9 teams got a first round bye, I believe, and then 8 teams would get a first round bye or something like that. There was 25 teams that made it. Oh, I know what it was. 7 would get byes. 18 would play, leaving 9, and then UCLA would start in the Sweet 16. So Sweet 16 down to 8, and then they get to the Final Four. So it wasn't the same, and I am not knocking Wooden. I'm not knocking any of the great players from UCLA, but the NCAA tournament that's played today with 68 teams now, and where you have to win 6 games and you could be traveling here, there, and everywhere, it's just a much more difficult road. And probably I would say this, somewhere along the line, those great UCLA teams might have been picked off earlier in the tournament than getting to the Final Four. That being said, that's all big ifs. UCLA was the New York Yankees of college basketball in the 60s and 70s, which is why I never liked them. But now I just want to focus on Bill Walton, who was, when I was a kid, I guess you would consider him out there, kind of like a hippie with the long hair, anti-war, and all the rest of it. He was, to say the least, a bit of a character. He'll admit he was a bit of a character. For whatever reason, I remember seeing an article on him or a TV show on him. I don't think he lost a game until he got to UCLA. And you're talking about middle school, their ideas of travel teams back then. He grew up in San Diego. I know that he always gave quite a shout out to his early coaches who demanded a lot from him, but also made the game fun. He has also said about Wooden, they didn't always get along, obviously for political reasons and all the rest of it. I just wanted to show you this, the back of the card of, now this is 1978-79. He's injured. So this is the 1980 card or 79-80 card. But what's kind of cool is a little trivia question. Who coached the ABA San Diego Conquistadors? And it was none other but a great center by the name of Wilt Chamberlain. Chamberlain never wins a champion. Well, here now I'm digressing a little bit. I think most people, when they talk about the great centers of the NBA, maybe Walton is not in the top 5, but he's certainly in the top 10. I had a buddy of mine who used to say to me, probably the best college basketball player he had ever seen. He was just really a superb passer. Good defender. Probably didn't score or could score with the same in the same abundance as a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or certainly Wilt Chamberlain, but nobody could. I will tell you this, and this is just I don't know why more kids aren't learning the hook shot, because without a doubt, the most lethal shot to this day in all of basketball is Kareem Abdul's hook shot, which he could take from 5 feet away all the way out to 20. I even think that he could have probably taken it with the 3-point becoming such a popular shot today. I mean, there's not a game that doesn't go by where there aren't, let's say, at least 30 shots by both teams from the 3-point range. But believe me when I say this, one, there's no defense against the hook shot, especially Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You're talking about a guy who's 7'2". Now he extends his arm. It's probably 3 feet in length. So his shot, when you think about it, his hands and the ball are above the rim as he's taking the shot. Most guys cannot say that. I know I can't. And it was just lethal. And like I said, there's no defense against it, because if he could shoot it right and left-handed with just tremendous talent and just tremendous skill. And there's no defense against it, because you can't get near, because to get to the player's arm, you got to go through the body. And, of course, that's a foul, obviously. But why more people aren't learning to shoot that? And I know Magic Johnson put that in his resume a little bit, his shot selection, and it came to help him with the Lakers in his NBA career. But Walton was more of a passer, defensive guy. I know people are going to talk about his 73 season, 72-73, when he was 21 of 22. Just an unbelievable night against Memphis State in St. Louis. Larry Keenan was the big player for the Memphis State Tigers. And Walton and I was rooting for Memphis State. And they beat them 87-66 in that game. And believe me, it wasn't even that close. I think they were down 14-15 before they knew what hit them within the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game. It was just not close at all. And Walton just put on an unbelievable show. Walton's big problem was he was 7 foot, maybe 6'11 and a half, okay? But he was a legit center, but he was always injured. In fact, look at this. The card I brought up, he was out for the season injured. And I was looking at his basketball reference stats, or his stats courtesy of basketball reference. There was only one season where he played 80 games, and that was when he was only doing 20 minutes a game with the Celtics. And he probably didn't have to play all that much. But let me just run by this. So Walton appears on his first with UCLA was 1971-72. And Schwen Nader was their center. All right. I know it was Steve Patterson, Schwen Nader, of course. 72-73. Walton is a junior center. Why isn't he on the sophomore season? Let me just take a look at that, okay? Walton should be there. Oh, he is. I'm sorry. Sophomore. Ready for this? He averaged 21 points a game with 15 rebounds. So he was a scoring machine in college. Remember, you're playing 40 minutes. Equate that to 48 minutes, and you probably get about 28 points a game from Walton at his height when he was not really hurt. And in 72-73, they defeated Georgia, I believe, in the finals. But Walton averaged 20 points, 16.9 rebounds, and just two incredible seasons. They beat, that was Memphis. In 71-72, they beat Georgia, And in 70-71, they beat Villanova. So he beats Memphis. The previous year, they beat Florida State, 81-76. I think that was the closest of all the teams to come closest to knocking off UCLA, let's say, during that run, with the exception, of course, of NC State. But I'm talking about the championship run. And then in 72-73, he defeats Memphis State, wins the MVP. They come back, and here was the story. And here's what I always did learn to appreciate about Walton was this. He never offered any excuses. That year, of course, there was UCLA was carrying with them. The previous year, they were 30-0. The previous year, they were 30-0. And in the previous year, 70-71, they were 29-1, losing, of course, to that to Notre Dame in 1971. So UCLA lost to Notre Dame twice. Now, I didn't see this game. So from that point on, they were 14-0 going into that game. UCLA loses. They finish. They go on a 15-game winning streak. They win the NCAA tournament. Then they win. Now they're up to 45 after going 30-0. They are now 65-0, and they meet Notre Dame again. And they are at, I believe, they were 13-0. So you're talking about 78, 88 games in a row. And they had just beaten Iowa on January 17th on a Thursday night. Now they meet Notre Dame, which was ranked number 2 in the country. Notre Dame had a number of great players from New Jersey. So I'm a Notre Dame fan. The game was broadcast by a production company called TVS, which did college basketball at the time. And I'm sorry, I was looking over here instead of at the camera. But Digger Phelps had come in after his unbelievable season with Fordham in 71. He got them into the tournament. They go 26-4. And at that time, and this is what I mean, they put all the Eastern teams in one region, all the Western teams in one region, etc. Not like where they're mixing and matching and trying to get as close to seeding and power and strength as they are today. It's much more scientific, much more metrics. I think it's a better game. I'm just telling you how it was. And they had guys like Billy Paterno, Gary Brokaw, John Shoemate, I believe Dwight Clay, Pete Crotty might have been from New Jersey. But these are all guys that they had. And I just remember, here was the team that they actually had 4 guys who would go on to the pros. John Shoemate, Adrian Dantley, who I absolutely love. He was from D.C. He was probably the big player that Phelps would get in his first 4 or 5 years. I mean, he was definitely a big-time star. And I think Dantley goes on. He does play for a championship team in the NCAA. I mean, he was, put it this way, high school parade All-American, 2-time consensus All-American, 2-time NCAA All-Region, averaged 25 points while he was in college. Played for the Buffalo Braves. Buffalo Braves had, ready for this, and this is where I'm going off, they had McAdoo, Ernie D, and Adrian Dantley on their teams. That's why they had some 50-win seasons in the middle part of the 70s. And Dantley, of course, would finish his career. He played with Detroit. Anyway, it was a great game. And if you ever see that game on YouTube or whatever, UCLA loses by a point. They had the ball let's say the last 10 seconds. They took like 2-3 shots from close up and it kept bouncing off. Well, anyway, UCLA loses the game. But what jumps out at me, and I don't remember this as a kid, it's just from reviewing the game. Again, that game would have been played so much differently today. Wooden doesn't milk the clock. He played the game as if he was down 5 points, or he played the game as if he was up 5 points early in the second half or late in the first half. That is that if they saw an open shot, it wasn't like they were milking the clock. They would take it, and they just went cold. And Notre Dame with the crowd, and Notre Dame really, when you think about it, win one for the Gipper, that kind of stuff. Just the Notre Dame, I don't know, sports. How do we say it? Just the ghost of Notre Dame, and the spirit of Notre Dame from football. Well, it translated into basketball, and they beat them by a point. Now, remember, Notre Dame ended one winning streak. Here they end the big winning streak, and people don't realize this, but that year they would face I believe they faced UCLA again. This time, UCLA was ranked number 2. They faced UCLA when they were number 1. Then they beat them. They go into Pauley Pavilion because that's how it used to be too. They met them a week later. And this time, UCLA beat it by 19 points. So you're saying, wow, okay? Now, just unbelievable what UCLA would do when they had a mind to it. And that 73-74 team was probably Walton. Well, getting back to everything, Walton had said that 73-74 team had some controversy on it, starting with the Notre Dame loss. Maybe Wooden lost a little bit, but they go up to what they used to do in the Pac-8 then, that they would go, let's say, on a Friday, Saturday. and they would travel to Oregon and play the two Oregon teams, Oregon State. Then they would go to Washington, play Washington State and Washington, all on separate weekends. So here's what happened. They are 18-1. They play UCLA ranked number 1, and they go to Oregon State. They beat Oregon State 80-75 at Pauley. That weekend, that was Saturday, February 9th. Now they go up to Oregon State the following Friday, February 15th, 1974, and they lose by 4. The next night, Saturday, February 16th, they lose to Oregon by 5. So now they have 3 losses on their ledger. First time they've had 3 losses in about 4 or 5 years. That's number 1. But it's 2 losses in the Pac-8, which, of course, now you got to qualify for the NCAA tournament. Well, they rally, finish the season 23-3. They get to the tournament. They beat number 20 Dayton 111-100 in a game that went to 3 overtimes. Then they beat San Francisco. I guess you could consider San Francisco a rival, and ironic too because the great San Francisco teams of Bill Russell, they beat them by 23. Then they face NC State with the great David Thompson. And when I tell you the great David Thompson, he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. Yeah, I would say statistically speaking and probably from an athletic point of view, Jordan is probably, without a doubt, the greater player. But when I tell you that Thompson, 6'4", they had the same body type, where Jordan could probably play small forward because, I don't know, he was just built differently, a little, just more muscular. And I attribute that to, the game 10 years later and all the rest of it. But Thompson was a great player, kind of like sliced through the defenses, could dunk, could get sky high, off the glass, as they say, rebound the ball, shoot the ball. He was everything. He was in fact, he scored 73 points, I think, for Denver in one of the last seasons that he played for Denver. He scored 73 points. So this guy was a legit player. And he was a great college player. And here is Bill Walton and the UCLA Bruins now playing Tommy Burleson, who is 7'4", Monty Toe. You went from Tom Burleson, 7'4", to, and you can't even see how low I'm getting with my hand here, Monty Toe, who's about 5'2". And, of course, you have David Thompson. And NC State finished that season unbeaten. But UCLA went to double overtime before they lost to David Thompson and the Wolfpack, 80-77. And what I really appreciated most when I heard the interview, it might have been on The Fan years ago with Walton, and believe me, he was an interesting interview because, like I said, if you listen to his conversations on when he was broadcasting and you heard him as a color commentator and stuff, he was really upfront about things. Very opinionated, but in a good sense, not critical of players, but critical of what players were doing on certain plays, critical maybe of certain calls or why they were doing what they were doing. And he basically said that 74 team is probably his biggest disappointment because he felt that they choked. Now, I would never use that with college. I would never use that with amateurs. But here's Walton saying that the team actually choked. He felt that they were a better team, but they got beat. He's taking nothing away from David Thompson when he says that they choked. He says they just didn't play well. And he attributes lots of things. Maybe his own personal confrontations with John Wooden. Maybe that his mind was lost on other things besides playing basketball at UCLA and getting an education and all the rest of it. But I always thought he was pretty upfront about that he said we should have, we didn't, and I feel like we choked. Okay? And as I said, taking nothing away from David Thompson because he does praise that Wolfpack team. I mean, they beat them. They ended their quote-unquote dynasties, prevented them from getting to the championship game where they would have played Marquette had they won. And and here's the interesting thing, that Marquette team would have a future NBA teammate by the name of Maurice Lucas. That team was loaded for bear, too. They had guys like, put it this way, they talk about Calipari being able to recruit or Danny Hurley being able to recruit. Al McGuire got guys from all over. Jim Jones, he got Al McGuire, Bo Ellis. His son ran the offense for their 70 team. So he got great players. Butch Lee. He got Jimmy Boylan from New Jersey. So I was always happy that Jimmy Boylan, out of, I believe, Hudson Catholic, led that Warrior team to the 77 championship over the Michael Corrin, also from Hudson Catholic or Jersey City, to the championship in the 77 NCAA tournament. And then, of course, they used to play a consolation game, and they beat in Bill Walton's final game as a UCLA Bruin. They beat a Kansas team that was ranked number 6 in the country of great basketball pedigree, Kansas. So that UCLA team under Walton was just phenomenal. Had their ups and downs, but still won 2 titles. He won an MVP, probably the best player in college basketball by far those 3 years, maybe with the exception of David Thompson. But by far, Walton was just electrifying. And now he goes to the pros. And here's the shame, and I only have a few minutes on this. I'm so glad I actually talked more about his UCLA years because I remember them so well. He goes to the Trailblazers, and I know from day one, he basically, it was frustrating. I liked the Trailblazers as a kid. I'm not saying I rooted for them or followed them nightly. I actually rooted for the Kansas City Kings, who were the Cincinnati Royals at one point, who used to be the Kansas City Omaha Kings. So I was an NBA fan, but I liked the Trailblazers because they were different. They weren't the Celtics. I like teams like the Phoenix Suns with Connie Hawkins, but I liked that team, and actually, that was a workman-like team, blue collar. You had Walton, definitely a star. You had Bobby Gross. You had Lionel Hollins, you had Dave Twierzik, and you had Maurice Lucas. Those are just 5 guys I can name off the top of my head. Unfortunately, I'm now glad that they won because I did root for the Sixers in the championship round. They played the Sixers in 1976-77, and there was a big brouhaha in that game between the Sixers and Maurice Lucas, who was he was a big physical player. He was tough as nails. And they were down 2-0, I believe, the Trailblazers. They had the fight, and they came back, and they beat the Sixers 4 straight. I was actually rooting for the Sixers in that tournament, in that championship. Now that you have years later, you're kind of glad that the Trailblazers won. Here's the thing, though, and this is probably emblematic of the Walton years. The next year, they get off, and they win 50 of their first 60 games. Nobody's going to touch them. Nobody in the league is going to touch them. You're almost saying to yourself, wow, are they going to win like 75 or are they going to win 70 games? Could have been the first NBA team to win 70 games regular season. And Walton goes down with many of his foot injuries. And if he's not breaking a toe, he's breaking an ankle. If he's not breaking an ankle, he's breaking, all those other bones in your feet and all the rest of it. But for whatever reason, Walton was just afflicted with leg injuries his entire career. The only good thing, and you thought his career was going to be over, because ready for this, I'm using Basketball Reference. He missed actually 2 full seasons with foot injuries, 1980 and 81 and 81-82. And on top of that, he missed the 78-79 season with an injured foot. He goes to San Diego hoping to recover his career in between those 3 seasons. Averaged 24 minutes and did pretty good. Averaged 13.9 points a game, but never got the San Diego Clippers anywhere near what they could have been. They become the LA Clippers in 84 and 85, and in his last 2 years in the NBA, he plays for the Boston Celtics and wins the championship and actually was named the 6th man of the year on that Celtic team that wins the championship in 1985-86, beating the Houston Rockets. Actually, they beat the Rockets twice. It's amazing. They beat the Rockets twice in championship play. And then, of course, 87-88, another injured foot. And so ends the career of the great redhead, Bill Walton. Hey, this is Will O'Toole bringing you the basketball life of Bill Walton. Thanks for joining us here on Park Ridge Sports History. Shout out, as always, to Howard Frederick, who helps me so much producing the show. See you next week.